Thank you for tuning in to the Natty News Daily podcast. This episode is brought to you in part by our sponsor, Core Nutritionals. You can check out corenutritionals.com for all your supplement needs and use code Natty News Daily at checkout to save 20%. Enjoy the episode.
What's going on, people? Welcome to another episode of the Natty News Daily podcast. We have a very special guest on. For those in the Canadian scene, especially, you will know, I imagine, who this man is, Mr. Amer the Hammer. Welcome to the podcast, my man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again as well.
Oh, we appreciate it. So, for those that maybe don't know you, because interestingly enough, I actually checked the analytics of our Natty News page, and over half of our audience is overseas in Europe. A small portion of our audience is Canadian. So there's probably quite a few listeners that maybe aren't familiar with you. So can you kind of give a brief little intro of where you've come from and your kind of status as a coach here in Canada?
Sure, absolutely. So I started competing myself when I was 18 years old. I was competing in WBFF at the time. There wasn't any IFBB or CPA or anything like that in terms of men's physique and all the other categories, classic physique and stuff. So that was like the place to be, the organization to be at the time. I turned pro as the youngest in the world. You know, I was 21 years old. And then I stopped competing at the age of I was 24 years old. At that time when I stopped competing, they just had introduced men's physique that same year to the IFBB and OPA at the time, which was Ontario Physique Association. And I was done with competing myself. You know, I'd been competing for about 7 years at that time, somewhere around that. And I was exhausted, you know, from it. And I didn't really love competing anymore. You know, I realized at some point too, like it is a genetics game when you're at the top of the game. Okay.
Yep, for sure.
And I couldn't get my waist smaller. I also couldn't get any bigger for the category I was competing in because if I got bigger, then I'd outgrow the category. They actually told me I'm a little bit too big. So, you know, I could manipulate my body a little bit and get my shoulders a bit bigger and all that, but I wasn't really interested in, you know, when you don't love doing something, you got to stop doing it. I'm a firm believer of that, and I never look back. So, but it was a natural transition for me. I already started coaching people. You know, I just naturally started coaching people. I wasn't trying to do it as a business. It wasn't such thing. There was no such thing as a business for coaching at that time anyways.
Yep.
It's people asking me to help them. I would tell them what to do. If they didn't listen, I would tell them to get lost. So it was quite simple. You know, the formula was simple. I wasn't getting paid, so I had nothing to lose. I wasn't worried that they were going to leave me as an athlete, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't my business. It wasn't where I was making money. So I can be as honest as I possibly could be or wanted to be with no risk of losing anything, right? And I think so that's where I got my start in coaching, and then obviously it became more of a business, and I hired more coaches, and I've gone through different stages and phases, you know, where I had employees working as contest prep coaches. I don't do that anymore. It's just solely me, and then I have other businesses for lifestyle coaching. They're called Man the F Up and Lady the F Up, and then our contest prep coaching business and our gyms are called Hammer Fitness.
Yep. Did you do any, I'm trying to remember kind of the backstory a little bit, because I know you managed like a restaurant and stuff. Did you do any personal training along that journey, like formally?
Sure, yeah.
Or was it, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so while I was competing and while I was working at the restaurant, because this was like all crossroads at one time, I was managing a restaurant, as you remember. Thanks for reminding me of that terrible memory. But it taught me many valuable lessons at that point in my life, you know, and I think that it helped me manage my business and manage people in my business, even though, you know, it's a constant work in progress, but it gave me the fundamentals for doing that. So I was training people, you know, and I was at this point where I said to myself, okay, I'm training people. I can't make any more money because I have no more time in the day. So I'm kind of maxed out, which was about 2 or 3 people a day. But I was looking at it and saying, okay, I can probably make some money out of this, but I have to give something. Okay. And I remember just looking around in the restaurant one day, and I looked at a lot of different people that had always said they're not going to be here next year, you know. And I remember hearing that for years and years and years. And then I said to myself, I'm going to end up being one of these people if I don't do something now. And that was it. I quit. I had to do it impulsively because, you know, naturally I'm a little bit of a fearful person to make those kind of life changes. I'm very devoted and committed to a job and things that I do. So it was challenging for me, but I had to do it because I knew I'd end up one of those people that are constantly saying it and never doing it. And it, you know, that thought alone triggered me to make that decision.
Make that jump. So you
How
mentioned,
did you make that jump financially and just figuring that out, or did you just do it? And
Yeah, I did it, and I the first year I was actually saying to at the end of the year, it's not like a any sort of success story where it was like, oh, this was so easy. I did it, and I remember thinking to myself, man, I made a big mistake. After the first year, I remember making $12,000 for the whole year in personal training. And I was really, disappointed and fearful. I was like, man, I really thought I was better than I was. People really liked me. They came to me, but I didn't make nearly as much money as I thought I was going to make or be able to do. Clients were canceling. I didn't have a system. It was a mess, right? And I had to really figure things out quick. But I also had to have an honest talk with myself and say, like, are you really trying? And I felt like I wasn't really giving it my all. I felt like it was an excuse to work for myself so that I don't have to listen to anyone. And I was just kind of living a free for all lifestyle and making nothing.
Yeah. It's so interesting to see, like, who I know you as now, and to hear that origin story. Like, you seem to be very, like, cool and calculated, and to hear that you were scared to make that jump and to make 12,000 a year. Like, a lot of coaches in our space would hear that and be like, oh my God, like, how did you even, like, sleep at night knowing you did that?
Yeah.
That's
well,
fair.
you sleep in your mom's basement. That's how you sleep.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, so you mentioned your two kind of side lady the F up and man the F up that work under you, which I think kind of transitions well into what I want to talk about, because the name kind of speaks to what you're all about, which I love. So when a client comes to you, do you find, I'm sure nowadays you probably get people that resonate with that, but maybe at the beginning when you are kind of working with anybody and everybody, like, how are you kind of trying to get this headspace into your athletes?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the biggest mistakes I made was taking on people that don't fit into my system. That's number one, right? I wasn't pre-qualifying people nearly enough. I would take people and I would assume that everybody can do it. Everyone was ready to do it. And sadly, I came to the realization that some people actually will do worse with me than what they're capable of, because they're not ready for the level of coaching that I'm coaching people at, or the communication in which I'm working. And I'm not saying that I'm better than someone else or worse than someone else. It has nothing to do with that. But everybody needs something different at different points in their career or their journey, right? So, there's people to this day that come to me and say, oh, I'm so happy I met you. I wish I started with you sooner. I wasted time with my last coach. And then I say to them, you shouldn't think that way, because if you would have met me when you started with that coach, you probably would have ended up quitting working with me. You probably weren't ready. So you should be thankful for every stage you've gone through, because it's prepared you for the next stage. Yeah. So the biggest thing is, like, I've gone through many different, iterations of myself even. And I think the best one that I'm most happy with is the most honest one. And I've gone through different stages where, when there's money involved and this is your livelihood, you don't want to lose money. So you're trying to take people, even though they may not fit into your system or to your coaching style. And I would take people and I would, try to work with them. And then I realized, like, they're not my clientele. Why am I trying to make it work? And then I had to realize that there are enough people out there that do fit your coaching style, but you will never attract those people if you are working with the wrong people. Because it's very difficult to go from one coaching style communication to another back and forth all day. And I'm not saying you don't individualize things. Obviously we do. But when you're changing who you are to accommodate people, it is very difficult. If you have to talk in a certain tone, one person than another, it's very different. It's very difficult to do, right? And I found that I was, like, softening my coaching style to accommodate the majority, or the minority, which affected the majority.
Right.
And my results started to go down. And, like, coaching and success is not like this. You're not always going up. It's not this upward trajectory. I've gone through stages where my work was not that good, and I had to really self-reflect and say, why isn't your work that good? Well, I think you're wasting time with people you shouldn't be. I think you're investing time into people that can't be good because you want the money, because you want to work with people, because for whatever reasons, right?
Yep.
And then it wasn't until I could fully let go of all of those fears once again that I was able to, get to the next stage in my work. And so I think to answer your question, there isn't too much like a pushback or resistance when it's the right clientele, when it's the right person. The hard part is, like, being really honest and being able to, like, turn people away. That's hard. It's very difficult to do.
especially when, like you said, money's involved, right? When your paycheck and your, the clients that you have are paying your bills and stuff like that. And, if you say, okay, a quarter of my clientele isn't vibing well, and you say, you know what, sorry, you 12 guys, you got to go. And then you realize, you start doing some math on that, and it gets your mom's basement might start looking attractive again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. And it's like, the problem with the work that we do is you are the business owner and you're also the coach.
Yeah.
And in what business in the world do you go in and they're almost like breaking you down?
Yeah.
Like, imagine walking into a clothing store and they're like, that looks terrible on you.
Yeah.
No one's going to buy anything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're being honest with people and then expecting them to stay, which is also a little bit difficult because not everybody wants that. But you're also asking people to do the work on top of it. Any other service that we pay for the most part in our lives, people are doing the work for you. Like, I'm going to pay someone to clean my car so that they can clean my car, not so that they can teach me how to do it.
Yeah.
So it becomes exceptionally difficult. And that's why you have to create a track record for yourself, like you have to, and it takes time to do that where people trust you. And the more people trust you, the less resistance there's going to be also. And that's what makes really good clientele. And I'm sure you're seeing it now. Your clients are better. Like, when I met you 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and I saw your work, it's nothing compared to what it is today. And it's because people start to trust you more, and it becomes a little bit more effortless for you as a coach, where they come in, they're like, I trust you. The more they are on that trust side of the spectrum, the less they are on the resistance side.
Yep. Yep. And that just builds almost like a faith in the process, right? Like, even if you're at the time maybe not even making the right move, they trust that it is the right move. And then in hindsight, you're like, I should have did this, maybe refeed here, or we could have pushed calories a little harder here. They don't know, right? So they just, okay, you tell me what to do, I'll do it.
It's not the process. It's not the method. Honestly, it's not the prescription that gets people the results. It's their level of effort. And the higher they are, the more they trust you, the more effort they're going to give. So it doesn't even matter what they really do at the end of the day. Like, within reason, everybody's coaching is very similar in terms of the diet and everything like that. Like, it's not rocket science. What we're doing is we're cutting calories. It's a deficit. There's no way about that. There's no way around that. So what you really need to focus on as a coach is like getting people to trust you more and believe and have faith, as you say. And the more that they do, the better they're gonna end up committing to your process, and the better results you're gonna get with these people.
Yep. Yep. What do you how do I word this? When a client struggles. So, for example, I listened to your podcast. What was her name that just turned pro? Bikini.
Lindsay.
I listened to that podcast in her little binge fest a week out. That's obviously a specific scenario that I'm thinking of. But when you have clients that have, especially when they're competitors and they're at a high level, or their potential is at a high level, like Dove, right? You knew from the get-go, like, okay, we could do this and we could do it at a high level. And they have slip-ups. Like, how do you navigate that through your communication? Like, are you a hard ass about it? Or is it like trying to diagnose, why did that happen? How do we prevent it? What does that look like?
Everybody's very different. This is where the individualization in coaching comes from, and I couldn't even give you this general answer because, for example, parenting and childhood forms people, largely who people are, and within varying degrees, that person's always going to be the same person. We can get better, we can get worse, but our personality to some degree is already largely formed. So, someone like Dove, who turned pro in wellness, natural wellness, I don't need to necessarily be hard on her per se, because she's really hard on herself, So I don't need to give her shit, because she's not deviating from anything ever. She's actually trying to do a little bit too much, because she thinks doing more is going to make her better, which is the right mindset to have. And I'm not saying Lindsay doesn't have that mindset. It's just, she had a slip up. She was stressed. There was all these things at once, and she was highly stressed, and she almost had a moment of defeat. She had ice cream. With her, it was a little bit more of a tough love, it was more honesty, and so I also understand my clients, and this is the most important thing, is understanding the people you're working with. If somebody grew up with a narcissistic mother that beat them down their whole life, well, You don't need to come and beat that person down. They probably need to be uplifted a little bit more.
Yeah. They've done that work for you.
Yeah. So you need to do the opposite, perhaps, right? Like, and that's why I say you can't, it's very, very hard. But for the most part, I think that my coaching communication is pretty consistent. I try to be very disciplined in my coaching communication and reiterate my messaging over and over. You know, I try to redirect people's thoughts. I try to reinforce their thoughts. And it's by being consistent myself when I'm coaching people. And this is like the most important thing as a contest prep coach. Your level of discipline needs to match the level of discipline of your athletes. And I'm not talking about like our diet and our training, but it's like how I show up to my communication every day, because there's days where you may not want to pay too much attention. You may be stressed yourself. You may be dealing with stuff yourself, but you have to sit down and do your work with extreme focus and extreme diligence when you may not want to be, or you may have to say things when you don't want to. Like, we don't always want to be truthful with people. We don't want to hurt people's feelings, but like, that's the discipline required and demanded of us as coaches.
Yep. Yeah. How you show up for them, right, is just as important as how they show up for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But when you really show up for people and they know that you're really invested, they will work 100 times. People work 100 times harder for you.
Yeah. Well, they want to prove it to you, right, that your time invested in them was worthwhile.
Yeah, there's a common denominator I feel and have heard from my clients that do exceptionally well. And it's usually the clients that say, I want to do this for you. Like, I want to see your reaction after I win. Like, I'm doing it for us. Whereas the people that are, you know, you hear it in the word choice they use, like, I want to turn pro, I'm going to this, I'm going to that. They don't do as well as the people that have a greater reason for doing it.
Yep. I think that too speaks to the culture of your community, right? Like, I anytime I'm at shows and you're there, or your clients have a presence there, like the team, you know, Hammer Clothing, which was something that, like, when I was coming up, I was like, man, I see his stuff everywhere. That makes sense, because then there's that association, right? And people are genuinely proud to be on your team, right? And be a client of yours, and the community involved. When there's, you know, I was sitting there at the King Kong, and, you know, you had athletes on stage, and Dove is over here, and, you know, people are over here cheering for clients that share the team, right? Like that's the culture and community, right? And now, like you said, make you proud, make the teammates proud. Like, that's such a stronger fuel than getting a plastic trophy.
People want to in life generally feel like they're collaborating to something greater. You know, when people feel like you can go to a restaurant and you could say to the chef, hey, can you make my food like this? I'm a bodybuilder, I'm competing in a show. They're not going to be upset and annoyed that you're doing that. They're going to feel happy because they're contributing to your success. Like, they might want to come out and talk to you and say, wow, like, cool, you're a bodybuilder. Like, I actually like they're going to go in that kitchen and make the food the best they can to ensure they're contributing to your success, more than if someone was just coming to eat out for pleasure.
Yep. And they'll tell all the mates in the kitchen about it, right? Hey, man, there's this guy out there. He's huge. I'm making his chicken. Don't get the sauce away from me. What are you doing?
Yes, exactly. Because we want to feel like we're useful and contributing to one another.
Yeah, that's super cool. Awesome. So when you tell me this, when someone comes to you and I want to win, and maybe they're not there yet, how do you navigate that one? Because maybe the likelihood of them winning is probably not on their side. How do you kind of like put that fire out a little bit in a constructive manner and start to shift the headspace to, like, I want to be my best, I want to make you proud, I want to kill it, I want to put all my effort into this, and shift it towards first place, pro card overall, you know, the small minority are going to achieve?
I think for me, the majority of my clients are long-standing clients, long-term clients. I'm sure the same for you. So we go through like a natural progression, and I set realistic goals with them. You know, I've said to my client Bailey Brown, when she was doing nationals for the first time, I said, a realistic good placing for you here is going to be like, I would be happy if you cracked top 4.
Sure.
You know, that's what's realistic. And she did. She got 4th, and then she came back the following year and got 2nd. And I think that it's just about being honest and realistic in your expectations, but also in the expectations of, like, what are they doing on a daily basis? Is it congruent with what they're saying? and giving people accountability checks and saying, hey, you're not working at a pro level. You're not working at a level to win a regional show. I'm just telling you, you're not there yet, and one thing I used to be afraid to do is pull people out. Honestly, that's another thing. I didn't want to pull people out of a show. I didn't want to hurt their feelings. They spent all this money, all this time, and like now we're 6 weeks out and they're just not there. And I maybe wouldn't be as honest as I should have been. Whereas now I just tell them, you're not there yet and we're not going to do the show. And people generally take it well, I would say 80% of the time people take it well and they actually appreciate your honesty. And most people don't want to be embarrassed anyways, if they have that type of mindset. So I think that it goes back to the first thing I said, which is like when you remove the fear of like losing a client or losing, and it's not always money. It's just like, you don't want to lose clients either. I don't like losing business. I hate it. When I lose a client, it bothers me a lot, right? It's like, it makes me wonder, did I do something wrong? Did I do enough? So I'm always questioning myself, right? It burns me more than anything. But when you remove the financial aspect out of it, you almost always make the right choices, or the fear of loss. Let's say that when you remove the fear of loss, you almost always will do the right thing. And I set my life up in a way where I can have my lifestyle businesses so that coaching athletes for me can be a very not lucrative, but very honest and passionate type of work so that I can do my best work. And oddly enough, I ended up making more money as a result of doing that. But it's always tempting. The temptation is always there when there's like someone's willing to throw money at you and you have to say no because you know that they can't do it.
Yeah.
And Amer, how do you go about when you mention, like, you say someone like is 6 weeks out and you're like, you need to pull out of the show? Like, I mean, there's a lot of ways that message can be conveyed. And obviously the way that I see it is like, I want to pull you out of the show because I believe that's the best for you, right? But sometimes that can be a little bit difficult to convey. How do you go about conveying that? Now, it might be maybe different for someone you have a lot of rapport with and like you have a trusting relationship where you could be a little bit more straightforward, right? Versus somebody like if you're a little bit newer, you have to kind of approach it a little more gently and explain why. Is that kind of where you come from? How do you approach that?
Yeah, Dan, I think that's a very, very good question because I think that it's a mistake I've made in the past. And I think this is something I've learned from that, your viewers can learn from as if they're coaches, right? Or even if they're athletes. It's two things to that question, which is the first one is I laid that expectation out in the beginning now, right? So I didn't do that before. So imagine it just comes out of nowhere and you're like, hey, you're not ready. It's like, well, I didn't even know that was an option to not be ready, right? Like, you have to reverse engineer your system and say, where did I go wrong? First thing is, I'm going to let you know at certain points if you're not going to be ready. Okay. That's how we're going to ensure that you are going to be ready. The second thing is I'm not a very confrontational person. I think that some people think I am I am a fighter, but at the same time, I don't like to, right? I don't like arguing. I'm not like, I don't love it. So
I'm similar in that regard. Yeah.
Naturally, I shy away from like those tough conversations. Naturally, that's just my go-to. Like, oh, leave it alone, brush it under the carpet. Maybe we'll wait till 4 weeks out. Maybe we'll wait till 2 weeks out, and like keep pushing, and I would do that. And then I realized it always ends up blowing up. When you don't resolve problems, it blows up. So like that's again goes back to the discipline of doing the thing I don't want to do. And another thing too is like I was unknowingly like blaming the person, right? So I would blame the client almost like you're not ready, you're not this. And I just changed how I communicated the message, which is like, we didn't nail it. We're not there. And I think when you shift it from blaming and putting all the blame and responsibility on the client and being able to take that yourself, which is a very hard thing to do, especially when you're in a position of authority, you don't want to be wrong ever. Like you want to lead people to believe that you make the right decisions all the time. But when you do that, people trust you a little bit more. So it was just how I communicated the message to people, which completely changed how people took the message. It's not about what your message is, it's about how people take it. And I think that just being able to do that just saved me a lot of problems. I used to have a lot of problems in business or with people because of how I communicated. And it wasn't my intent. It's just how they took the message was different than what I thought I was doing. So I have to be very mindful, and I have to obviously take responsibility, and even to like tie this in, one of the biggest things for me was like, goes back to the discipline. I would typically project my frustration onto people and say, you're not ready, because maybe deep down I know I didn't give my all as a coach. So I don't typically even have those problems anymore where I have to tell somebody they're not ready, because I make sure that I'm so invested and aware and present into the process. Like I'm so present into the process when it's contest prep season, that like I would catch that at like 12 weeks out or 14 weeks out, so that it doesn't have to happen at 6 weeks out.
Yep.
Whereas like I maybe would let it slide and then think I could do damage control later on. So I think more than anything, that was the biggest change in my work.
Before
It's
we
kind of like the
before-
phrase like conflict deferred is conflict amplified. It's kind of a separate thing, but in a similar sense of how issues just snowball, and nipping them in the bud and early is,
Yeah,
that makes total sense.
You have to pay the price for everything you do. There's nothing free in life. And sometimes you don't know the price you're paying, and sometimes you'll never be able to calculate. It's not tangible, right? Like you can do stupid things and you're like, I got away with it. But like, you paid a price in a different way. You could have been maybe better or more of a person if you didn't do those things, right? So everything has a price to pay.
James, you're going to say something?
Yeah, just kind of building on that a little bit. This is a conversation I've had with a couple coaches, and it's a fear that I feel like a lot of coaches have. Not so much like pulling an athlete out of a show, but for instance, the athlete that comes to you maybe a little bit late in prep, or they've got a show that you don't think is ideal for them, and you want to turn them away from it. I think there's a lot of coaches that necessarily wouldn't, just because of the fear of, if I don't take them on as a prep client, someone else will. And obviously we're a little arrogant. We think I'm going to be the best case for them, right? So in that situation, how do you have that conversation, right? Where you think, you know what, that show's not going to be good for you. I can't take you on in prep, but I'm concerned if I don't, some other coach is going to, and it's not going to end well for you.
Yeah, that's another good question. And it goes back to, again, just being okay with losing things, not being tied to anything. And that was me before. I was like, I'm going to take everyone. I'm going to take everything. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do. And then realizing that it's not always even about you. Right. So, I just had to make that realization and be okay with not taking everyone, but also like, you have to figure out, do all you guys coach? Everyone here coaches?
Mm-hmm.
So you have
Some
to,
degree.
like in my experience, you have to really figure out who you want to be as a coach, right? Because there's nothing wrong with putting somebody on. Like, I'm not judging those people when they're not in great shape. To be honest with you, I'm actually happy. Like I'm happy that not everyone is. Like, if my client wins, I'm like, oh, thank God those people aren't in peak shape. Like that is why my client won. So it's not a terrible thing, right? Like, I don't look at them and look down on people. That's not what I do. I actually, I don't know where that person is at. That person may not be ready. Like, I had a client do the King Kong show. She came 5th place. She wasn't even close to what she could be, but I needed her to do that show to get over so many fears and obstacles that she had in her mind. That was the purpose for doing that, because I see the long-term relationship working with her of what she can be. I was like, you need to do it. You're not quitting. Like, you were doing this because she's like been procrastinating on this for years. And like, her bottleneck is not like, the reason why she can't even get better is because she just has so much fear. And when she finally just gets on the stage, realizes it's not that bad, she's like, you know what? I want to do this now, and I want to do this to win. So I like her. So I want to see that in her. So you have to look at yourself and say, like, who do I want to be as a coach? And I never answered that question honestly. I had a lot of fear. I would never say, like, I want to be the best. I want to be, I never had that like type of conviction in my work years ago. I never had that type of like, but even belief, honestly, where I'd say, like, I'm going to be the best at this one day. I'm not one of those people that like vocalize online that I'm the best and I'm going to be it's not my personality. So I didn't really have core values of like, and really like a goal as a coach of what I want to be. Like, how good do I want to be as a coach? So I was able to work with these people and take these people on. But like, when I said to myself, I want to be the absolute best, like, that's what I want to be. It's very easy for me to filter out the decisions I should be making and not making. Like, it was very easy for me to have this like value system to say it's not someone I can work with, even though I want to, even though I'm tempted to, I can't because it doesn't align with the values that I've set out for myself. And that completely changed how I coach people, how I intake people, how I pre-qualify people to work with me. And that may not be where you're at, right? Like not everyone is at that point. Like there's some coaches that like are so good with people doing their first show, and I'm not the best at working with people doing their first show because there's a lot of details that I may be overlooking where that person is at in their stage in their journey. And I see those coaches backstage with those people. I'm like, that coach is very good for that person right now. Like, even though the person doesn't look amazing for, the level, like that's what the person needs. And maybe they're doing it for fun the first time. Maybe they're doing it for experience. Like that's what that person needs right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. So like, you can't compare, as much as you can't compare yourself as an athlete, you can't compare yourself as a coach. You got to be real with yourself and say like, do I even deserve to turn people pro yet? Do I even deserve to win a regional overall yet? Like, where am I in that stage? And then figure out like where you want to be next. And like, then your decisions become a little bit easier.
Yeah.
I
think
love that answer. Thank you.
This is just as educational for coaches as it is for competitors at this point. This is money. I just had something top of my head. So along the lines of like your kind of come up as a coach, has your goal as a coach changed over the years? Because how many years now have you been like, Amer the Hammer, the coach?
I've been doing it for about 10, I would say about 10 years. Like I was personal training the earlier years. I've gone through stages where I had employees working. Like I would say the honest answer, me as a focused contest prep coach, like really focused on this, 2 years. Like focused, like nothing else.
Really?
Like, I turned people pro in 2012, 2013, 2014. I've turned people pro in 2016, 17, 18, 19, like all these years. But like, I can't honestly say I was 100% any of those years other than the last 2 years.
What was that shift for you then the last 2 years? Was it just kind of fine tuning, as the businesses kind of established themselves and you're like, okay, where do I really want to sink my teeth into? Where am I passionate? What was that direction for you?
Yeah, I never fully went all in. Number one,
Okay.
I always tiptoed around things, and it's like, again, this is even a belief system for me. I was always like, if you don't fully commit, you don't fully fail. It's like a fear. Like if I don't fully commit to this, I can't really fail. If I hire people and let them do the work, I don't really fail. I was never conscious of this. I never went around thinking that, but I drew the conclusion that it must be the reason why I don't fully commit to things, right? The fear of failing at it. So I again, I had an honest conversation with myself and I said, I can't trust anybody, to be honest with you, about myself, because I'm ultimately responsible and in control of myself. And if the bad things that happen in my life are my fault, that means I have complete control over the good things. And I just need to fully invest myself into something. And even if I fail, at least I have an accurate feedback loop system where I can say, this is why I failed, rather than blaming someone else all the time. Because I found myself always saying like, I just can never get ahead because of X. I could just never like reach. I didn't have as many wins because like I was focused on like my employee, or so I removed all the things that were excuses, and I said to myself, you have no more fucking excuses now. You are the excuse. And if you fail, you deserve to fail. And trust me, when you operate that way, you will never fail. You will never want to fail, even as an athlete. Like you can apply this mindset as an athlete. I tell my clients like, sometimes they might say to me like at 7 weeks out, like, hey, should I register for the show now? I'm like, why the fuck didn't you register for the show? That is why I was wondering why you didn't look as good as I thought you could. And it's like the hesitation there of not fully committing to something is the reason why you aren't being and getting to the best that you can be. Even though it's a couple $100, it's knowing that you signed on the dotted line pushes you to the next level.
Yeah, see, this is what I wanted to tap into. I knew it was in there. Let's go. So that's what I see of you with your clients. And I think that's probably what I really respect and admire the most, is that like intensity. And you see it in your clients that do really well. Like we see them tagging you in stories, like basically running on the Stairmaster, and they're like, yo, 60 minutes, easy money. Like 2 weeks out, no carbs, I don't give a shit. Like that mindset, like that is what I think you've really cultivated, and it's really cool to watch. Like even at shows, like watching you operate backstage, like you and your clients, like there's just this like laser focus. Like your figure girl last weekend, 2 weeks ago, whatever, at King Kong, like she was just dialed mentally, physically. Like you could see she was ready to punch through a brick wall.
Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of the process. And ingraining, what I said earlier was like reiterating and ingraining things into people's mind over and over. That's the discipline as a coach. Like I'm telling my athletes something and I'm reiterating it over and over. And I don't let people, because naturally, if that's not in you, you're going to want to deviate. Like if winning is not part of your DNA, you are always going to go back to the losing side. So like my discipline as a coach is like reminding you of the goal. It's reminding you of why we're here over and over until it like just becomes programmed in you. What do you think the army is? They're just like, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, sir, no, sir. The reason they do that is because they are getting you to remove the things that you think naturally and think the way we want you to think, so that when you go to war and you have to kill people, your emotions are not getting in the way. It's like a militant mindset, and that's how you create winners. Like you have to have a militant mindset to become a winner. For most people, not every single person is that way. I've seen there are obviously outliers that don't need to be, but like if you want to win, you have to think like a winner. You got to listen to things that like reiterate winning. You know, I'm not listening to like garbage junk music. Even as a coach, I'm listening to things that remind me of how much winning means to me over and over. And I tell my athletes the same thing. Like, why are you talking to that person? Honestly, that guy's a fucking loser. Look what he's talking to you about. Like, look at the way they're communicating to you. They're communicating like a loser. Why are you exposing yourself to someone that talks like that? Like, oh, yeah, just do this for the experience. And like you're hearing that you want to brainwash yourself with messages that are conducive to what you want to become and who you want to become, not bullshit.
Soundbite.
Where does that start with? Where does that start with? You, me, a coach.
Yep.
That starts with us. We set the pace. We set the tone for people.
That's wicked. That's wicked. I think that's a beautiful way to close this out, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate your time.
No problem. So if people want to find you, man, like I said at the beginning, a lot of our followers probably aren't familiar with you. Where do they hit you up?
Yeah, Instagram at Amer the Hammer or Hammer Fitness. You can follow me there, and all my links are there. I appreciate anyone following. You can shoot me a message, and I appreciate you guys having me on. You guys are very wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, no problem, man. Thank you. And selfishly, for any of Amer's clients that are not following Natty News on Instagram, we're on a uptick. We've gained about 1,200 people in the last 4 days. So road to 20K. So if any of Amer's clients want to show some love to us, we'd appreciate it. It's at Natty_News_Daily on Instagram, and we'd appreciate it. So if you guys like this episode, give it a like, subscribe for future ones, and we'll see you guys in the next one.